Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to
Bienvenidos
tonight's
todos.
meeting.
Gracias a la reunión de esta noche.
We'll be talking about the housing
Estaremos hablando acerca de
and safety elements
los elementos de seguridad y vivienda
in unincorporated Marin County.
de la Agencia de Desarrollo Comunitario del Condado de Marin.
We're going to wait another minute or so to have
Vamos a
a
esperar
few
un
more
par de
people
minutos
log
más
on.
para tener más personas que ingresen a la reunión.
We still continue to have people arrive.
Todavía tenemos personas llegando.
So we're very excited with a good turnout tonight. And we'll be starting momentarily. We are excited that we're able to offer participation in tonight's workshop in 3 languages. So we have participation in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, and we're going to be using the Zoom translation features. So right now, all 3 languages are in the same room. I'm going to complete this announcement where once we're all finished with the translation instruction, you just go to the Zoom globe icon and choose your language. And now I'd like to pause for a moment so that Isaiah can provide the Spanish translation of the announcement.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Joan Chapley. Gracias a todos por estar acá. Estamos con la Agencia de Desarrollo Comunitario del Condado Marin y vamos a hablar acerca de los elementos de seguridad y vivienda. Este es un taller comunitario. Para todos los presentes tenemos interpretación en inglés, en español y en vietnamés o en idioma de Vietnam. Por favor, si usted tiene la opción y desea interpretación en español, accese al icono de Zoom del globo terráqueo que está en la parte de abajo y puede escoger el idioma que necesite, en este caso español.
Thank you, Isaiah. Now, I'd like to pause for Kenny to give the announcement in Vietnamese.
Chào mừng quý vị đến với buổi họp về vấn đề housing tại Marin County. Trong buổi họp ngày hôm nay thì chúng ta cùng có 3 ngôn ngữ, đó là tiếng Anh, tiếng Mễ và tiếng Việt. Quý vị nhấn vào dấu hiệu quả địa cầu để chọn ngôn ngữ thích hợp với quý vị. Và cũng bên dưới, quý vị cũng thấy chọn được cái ngôn ngữ. Nếu quý vị muốn có phụ đề thì quý vị nhấn vào hàng bên dưới để được có phụ đề bằng tiếng Việt. Cảm ơn quý vị.
Thank you, Kenny. So please choose the language for interpretation. And so the Zoom icon should be there. And so choose your language and we will be ready to start with our translation available in Spanish and Vietnamese. Okay, I think we have everything in order, so we're ready to begin. Now I'd like to introduce Lily Thomas, the planning manager with the Community Development Agency for Marin County. Welcome, Lily.
Thank you, Joan. Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming tonight. We are here to talk about housing and resiliency in our communities. This conversation is based on the context of updating our housing and safety plans. However, it really is about us working together to make Marin a stronger and more sustainable place to live. Over the past year and a half, we have faced a worldwide pandemic, which has affected all of us. However, our most vulnerable and lowest income residents were hardest hit. These plans are intended to make sure everyone in our communities can overcome challenges and be able to thrive through having a safe, affordable place to call home. I'd now like to introduce the team who's going to help the county plan to meet these challenges. We have Liz Darby, Jillian Zeiger, Leslie Lako, Aline Tannillian, and Tammy Taylor with the Community Development Agency. And we have our team of consultants with MIG and Veronica Tam and Associates, Veronica Tam, Barbara Beard, Joan Chaplick, Mark Hoffenheimer, Scott Davidson, Laura Stetson, Mirna Ortez, and Anna Padilla.
Okay, well, thank you, Lily. So now I'd like to review the agenda. My name's Joan Chaplick, and I'll be serving as the meeting facilitator and moderator. So during our program today, between now and 6 to 8 o'clock, in just a moment, I'll be going over our meeting objectives, and then we'll be reviewing the ground rules and the opportunities for how you can engage. Then our meeting is basically in two parts. First, we'll be talking about the housing element. There'll be a presentation, then we'll have a question and answer period, and then we'll put you all into small groups so that you can have a smaller discussion, and we'll have a report out of some of the highlights from the groups. Then in the second part, we will be presenting information regarding the safety element. There will be a question and answer period, followed by a large group discussion. Then we'll have our next steps and our closing comments. Our goals tonight are to make sure that the community is informed about the planning process. We want to make sure everyone knows that the housing and safety element planning process is underway. We want to make sure that you've had an opportunity to share your issues and concerns. And we also want to hear your ideas and strategies for how we can respond to some of these concerns. And then we want to share information about upcoming opportunities so that you can stay involved. Our ground rules: we have a lot of people on the call tonight, and we know that there are a variety of viewpoints represented in our group tonight. So let's be respectful of each other's opinions and respectful when we're sharing comments in the chat or in our small group discussion. We ask that you speak from your own perspective and not make assumptions about other people's points of view. I'll be providing direction as to when we want to receive your input, so that will help us manage all of the comments that we receive. When it's your turn in the small group, speak one at a time. And note that technology happens, so we'll need you to be flexible and patient if we have any small glitches. Mute yourself when you're not speaking in your small group. And if you want to keep your video on, that's wonderful. It'll help us stay visually connected. We also know you may have a busy household and it's easier to stay off screen, so whatever you're most comfortable with. And most importantly, this is just one meeting in a longer process. So we're not making any decisions tonight. We're receiving your input. So just to review the Zoom functions we'll be using, we've already talked to you about the interpretation channel. So if you needed Spanish or Vietnamese, you can participate that way. Primarily, we'll be using the chat function. So you'll have an opportunity at specific times to submit your questions or comments throughout the chat. And then when you're in your small group, you can use the raise hand function and the facilitator can recognize you so that you can speak to the group. We have a large group, so we won't be able to have verbal comments with the larger group, but there are a variety of ways that you can engage. So we're going to be asking some polling questions. We hope you'll all answer and participate fully. You'll be using the chat for comments and questions. In your small groups, you can speak verbally, speak directly with those in your group. And then again, we'll be using the chat again for large group discussion related to the safety element. So now let's get started. We want to find out a little bit more about you, and we're going to be asking these demographic questions during most of the outreach activities. So our first question, a Zoom poll is going to come up. Please tell us where you live. Do you live in unincorporated Marin County? Or do you live in one of the cities within Marin County? Or tell us if you don't live in Marin County, if you live outside. And so we want to get good participation. So I have, okay, our numbers are climbing and we're hoping that you'll answer the questions quickly so that we can go through them. This is the first of 6 quick polling questions. Okay, so I have about 40 respondents so far. And so I want to keep the pace of this moving quickly. So let's close the polling now and share the results. So we have a lot of interest from unincorporated county, but also from people who live in the cities and a few outside of Marin County who have come to tonight's meeting. Okay, great, thank you. Let's go to our next question. So now this is directed towards those who live in unincorporated Marin County. So if you can tell us what part of unincorporated Marin County you live in. Is it West Marin, unincorporated San Rafael, unincorporated Novato, unincorporated Southern Marin, unincorporated Central Marin, or you don't live in unincorporated Marin County. Okay, and I know not everyone is going to answer that question. So we're going to close the polling. I'll just give it another second here. Okay, let's close the polling and see where everybody's from within the unincorporated county. Okay, we have good representation from the various areas and neighborhoods within the county. Let's go to polling question number 3. So now we'd like to know where you work. Do you work in Marin County? And that includes the city. So yes, no, or if you're someone who doesn't work, retired, or for other reasons, please let us know that as well. Okay, and our responses are climbing. Great, we're getting even more participation on this question. Okay, let's close the polling and share the results. So most of you work in Marin County, several from outside, and we also have some folks that don't work in the county, that are currently not working. Okay, thank you. Let's go to question number 4. So now we'd like to know how long you've lived in Marin County. So anywhere within the county. We'd like to know maybe you're a new resident who's been here less than a year. Is it 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, or 10 plus years? Or are you someone from outside the county? Okay, so just a few more responses, and let's share the results of the poll. So you can see most of our participants, 83%, have been here for more than 10 years. And then we have a smaller number of folks that have been here for less. Okay, let's go to our 5th question. Now we'd like to know about your housing circumstances. So do you own your home? Do you rent your home? Do you live with family and friends? You're not owning or renting? Or do you not have permanent housing? And so we've almost heard from everyone on this one. Okay, just a few more responses coming in. Okay, let's close the polling. Okay, we have a 60% are homeowners, 32% renters. Okay, we have some folks who live with family and friends, and then just a few who don't have permanent housing. Okay, and then our next polling question, and this is the 6th and final polling question, is to tell us your age. And just a reminder, the polling is anonymous, but it just helps us understand how successful we were with our outreach and who we've been able to attract to tonight's meeting. So let's see, I just need to hear from a few more folks. Okay, let's close the polling. Okay, I'm happy to see that we have a good mix of age range represented. Unfortunately, we didn't attract any of the high school crowd, but we definitely have some young adults here tonight. So we're very happy that you're all here. Okay, so that is our final polling question. And there are the results. So now we're going to go to our next question, where we're going to give you a chance to test the chat. So this is something we're going to be using throughout the meeting. And so now I invite you to provide us one word you would use to describe living in Marin County. So just take a moment and type in a word, and I'm going to read them off as they come in. Beautiful, privileged, blessed, lovely, racist, expensive, community, majestic, expensive, white, peaceful, expensive, family, nature, another vote comment, racist, expensive, not diverse, community, muikara, relaxed. Let's see, any others coming in? Nature, unique, expensive. Okay, anyone else want to submit a one-word comment describing neoliberal? Lately stressful, entitled, nice. Sacred, bendicia, grateful, whoops, Okay. So thank you. So daunting is another one. Okay, we'll just give it 2 more seconds if there's any other words coming in through the chat to describe living in Marin County. Okay, well, thanks everyone for your participation and for using the chat. And that's a tool that we'll be using throughout the meeting. We also download the chat, so we save everything that comes in there. And I will try and read as many chat questions and comments as I can at the appropriate times in the meeting. And we had one late one come in, Deseguil Galdes, okay? And we'll make sure we get that on the board. Okay, so with that, we're going to bring that activity to a close. And now we're going to start our presentation regarding the housing element. So you're going to get an overview from our presenter, Veronica Tam from Veronica Tam and Associates. Welcome, Veronica.
Great, thank you, Joan. Let me start with the review of the housing element, why we're here, what we're doing. So the housing element is part of your general plan. It has to be updated every 8 years, and it has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And what is different about the housing element is it has a deadline. Our deadline is January 2023. And housing element, I just want to emphasize that this particular housing element covers only the unincorporated areas. Every jurisdiction in the state has to do a housing element. And so all the cities in Marin County are on their way doing their own housing element update. The process we're doing tonight, it only covers the unincorporated areas. Next slide. So the housing element has some key components to it. When we update the housing element, we need to look at the demographic trends in the unincorporated areas. How they impact the housing needs in the unincorporated areas. What are the market conditions today? And what are the special needs groups that may deserve our special attention? Special needs groups are usually the elderly, disabled, large households with 5 or more members, homeless, farm workers, and also female-headed households. And in many communities, we also look at military personnel if you're in a location that has that, or college students. Those would actually have an impact on your rental housing market particularly. In updating the housing element, we also looked at what you were able to accomplish in the past as a community. So what worked, what doesn't work. And so that would give us some ideas about how we're going to retool the programs and strategies for the upcoming 8 years. The housing element, in updating that, we also need to look at constraints. We know the needs we have. Now, how are we going to address those needs? We have to address the constraints facing us too. We look at governmental constraints, market constraints, environmental and infrastructure constraints. But we also look at opportunities and resources available to us in addressing those needs. A key component of that resource is look at areas where you can provide housing. Where can we build more housing? We also know that we, as a local jurisdiction, we're not in the position to build housing, so we rely on the public-private partnerships, particularly with nonprofit developers, to provide for affordable housing. We need to also look at what are the financial resources, what's the capacity do we have in terms of facilitating affordable housing in our community. And last but not least, we need to look at the housing plan from an equity lens. We need to affirmatively furthering fair housing. This housing element has to do that. And we'll go into that a little bit later about what are the analysis needed, but that is a very important component of the housing plan today. Next slide. Just before we go into some of the details, let's talk a little bit about Marin County today. Again, a lot of the statistics that I'm giving tonight, they cover, they're pertaining to unincorporated areas. Countywide, you have a population of 262,000 of residents, but about 67,000 of those live in the unincorporated areas. The unincorporated area generally has an older population. Your median age is 47 years. That's almost 7 years older than 20 years ago. And so that's a fairly rapid increase in terms of median age. About 22% of your population are seniors over the age of 65, and that is increased from 16% just in 2010. A lot of reflecting that the senior population, you have a lot of households that are singles, the people who are living alone. About 27% of the residents are living alone, and families represent about 66% of the overall households in the unincorporated areas. Earlier, we also talked about large households. Households of 5 or more people are generally considered a special needs population because having housing units that's adequately sized but affordable is difficult. About 8% of your homeowners, they are large households. 3% of them are 3% of the renters are large households. So large households may not be a very significant group, but then in terms of the number, but in terms of the extent of housing needs they face, should be pretty extensive as well. Persons with disability, about 9% of your residents have 1 or 2 disabilities. And in terms of unhoused individuals, as of 2020 or 2021, the unincorporated areas is estimated to have about 172 unhoused individuals. Next slide. Just looking at the race and ethnicity, earlier when we were testing the chat function and asking you to describe the community, it's indicated one of the words say white. And I think that was definitely true back 20 years ago, but the county has become, the unincorporated areas has become increasingly diverse, as shown in this particular chart. Back in 2000 or so, the majority of the population was white, and it's been decreasing over time and is projected to continue this decrease. And Hispanics is the rising group of population right now, and also certainly continue to increase. That really is reflecting the statewide trend. Asians and Blacks, though, however, has consistently been stable in your population trend. It doesn't seem to have a significant change. So it should, diversifying the population is certainly something that would make the unincorporated areas more interesting, but we are on that trend somewhat. Next slide. So now take a look at your housing stock. About 77% of your housing units are single-family detached homes. And attached homes, so usually those are duplex homes, but they call it, or maybe planned unit development, zero lot lines. Those are about 6.4%. So overall, about 83% of your housing stock is single-family homes. Only about 10% are multifamily with 5 or more units. Next slide. Looking at your tenure distribution, about 72% of your homes are occupied by homeowners. About 28% of them are occupied by renters. Now, I remember when we did the poll, about 36% of the people who attended this meeting at the time when we did the poll were renters. So certainly it shows that renters are very concerned about the housing situation in unincorporated areas. But also now comparing back to the slide we had before, you have about 83% of your housing stock being single family homes, but only about 72% being homeowners. That means very likely a pretty big proportion of your single family homes are being used as rentals. That is usually also an indication that there is limited rental housing in the community, multifamily housing and single family homes. It's being used as rentals because they cannot afford the ownership of the single family homes. Next slide. Part of the housing element emphasized on providing a variety of housing types for all income groups, particularly affordable housing for people who are lower income. What we are talking about, though, is what is affordable housing? Affordable housing is generally defined as a household spending no more than 30% of your income on housing costs, and that would include taxes, insurance, and utilities. That would be dry utilities. Those are the costs that are included in the housing cost factor. Spending no more than 30% of that on rent, mortgage, and all that other expenses. If you spend more than 30%, you're generally considered to be cost burdened. Now, if you're an upper income household, you make pretty good income, spending more than 30% may not be necessarily be an issue. In fact, it's pretty typical. However, when you're lower income, that can be a difficult situation, precarious situation, as we can see during the COVID season. Well, I shouldn't say seasons, during this pandemic, a lot of households who are lower income and spend a lot of money on housing. In the event of loss of income of employment, those were people at risk in terms of losing their housing arrangement. In the unincorporated areas, about 17% of the households spent more than 50% of their income on housing, and on top of that, about 19% of the households spent between 30 to 50%. So if you add those together, more than a third of the households in the unincorporated Marin County spent more than 30% on housing and considered to be cost burdened. Next slide. Now, just give you a little bit idea about income. In the past, when we talk to people about households needing affordable housing, and particularly people who are lower income, if you think about the high income profile of the county itself, when you are low income with a household of 4, you can be making $146,000 and still considered to be a low income household and cannot afford housing in the in the county or in the unincorporated areas. Moderate income households will still consider may have difficulty in affording housing in the area. They can make up to $180,000 or so. And so these are people who are working very hard, but because of the cost of living, because of the cost of housing in Marin County, find it difficult in finding affordable housing. Next slide. This is just to give you a little bit of a calculations. Just using the 30%, if you are a low-income household, making about $146,000, the top of the low-income households, 30% of that is only about $44,000, and you can spend about $3,700 or so on housing. That sounds a lot if you're in some other communities, but not very much at all in Marin County. We'll show it to you in the next slide. This is the kind of like the wage scale in Marin County according to the Department of the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics. And you can be a registered nurse and make about $150,000 a year. You can be a computer engineer making about an average of $135,000 a year. Those you would be able to afford to rent barely, but you will not be able to afford the mortgage of a median price home in Marin County or in the unincorporated areas, I should say. And if you're firefighters, if you're an elementary school teacher, if you are a service workers, you will not be able to afford the rent in the median rent in Marin County. Next slide. So now we go into a little bit of a topic that is a little bit more technical, but is also a critical component of the housing element, something called regional housing needs allocation. The housing element of every jurisdiction has to be able to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. What exactly is that? Well, the State's Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, determines how much growth is needed in the entire state and allocates that number of like the growth to the entire state through the regional governments, the council of governments. So for the Bay Area region, we got an allocation of 441,176 units that we have to be responsible for as a region. You must accommodate that. Each jurisdiction within the Bay Area would get an allocation. Marin County get 14,210 units. And as I mentioned before, this particular housing element, that the process we're talking about right now, this housing element covers only the unincorporated areas. The incorporated cities each have their own process of updating the housing element and dealing with their regional housing needs allocation. For the unincorporated county areas, we are allocated 3,569 units that we must accommodate from a policy standpoint in terms of land use planning and development standards. Next slide. This regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, is divided into income groups: very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. And as you can tell, that it's been the income level is set in relation to the area median income, the county-wide median income. We got an allocation of 1,100 very low income, 634 low income, moderate income 512, and then above moderate income 1,323. This is not to indicate that we have to build the units at these income level. The obligation of the RHNA is that you must plan for it from a land use perspective, and it's using density as a proxy to identify whether that land use or zoning is feasible for facilitating lower income. So we will be looking for sites with proper zoning in order to accommodate the units. Again, though, the obligation is not to build the units, but to plan for it. Next slide. So how are we going to meet the RHNA? It's certainly a challenge that we have to confront. What we can do is to take credits for housing that is already underway should be already. The regional housing needs allocation starts July 1st, 2022. And so anything that we approved but not yet building as of June 2022, we can credit it towards the regional housing needs allocation. So any things that pipeline projects that we don't anticipate that being completed before June next year, we can credit it towards the next regional housing needs allocation. So projects in the pipeline. But that's certainly not going to get you to the 3,000 units. We need to look at sites where housing can occur. This would include sites that are vacant and underutilized. You probably don't have a lot of that, but we do have to look for you don't have a lot of vacant sites probably, but you may have underutilized properties that can be redeveloped. We also need to look at accessory dwelling units. That is certainly an important component of the strategy, and infill housing sites that may be available. This is something that we will be working on over the next couple of months, and we'll be bringing back the results to you in the future. Next slide. The next component is the affirmatively furthering fair housing. This, as I mentioned before, the housing element needs to be looking at planning for housing from within an equity lens. We need to foster diversity and making sure that we do not perpetuate patterns of segregation. We need to lift barriers that would restrict access to resources and make sure that we foster inclusive communities. So the housing plan that we are doing, the housing element that we're working on, will have to meet those criteria. Next slide. Some of the key categories or key topics of analysis that we have to do in the housing element is to look at the current situation about fair housing, what kind of enforcement and outreach that the county is able to provide. We need to look at integration and segregation patterns and trends, and how do we utilize the housing element to maybe bridge the disparities. We need to look at racial and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. How do we use place-based strategies to improve those areas? As I mentioned before, access to opportunities is important. We also need to look at strategies to mitigate households that have disproportionate housing needs. So all of that would be folded in or integrated into the whole housing element strategy, particularly when it comes to identifying sites for new housing to occur, and finally to provide meaningful actions. And with that, I think that concludes my presentation. So please, if you have questions.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. So Veronica's given you a lot of information. It's a big overview and introduction to the planning process for preparing the housing element and many of the guidelines and requirements that the county must follow in this process and the timeline that has to be achieved. A number of you have been sending questions in through the chat, and the Marin County team has been answering them. And so now we'll continue to answer them with the larger group. And I'm going to ask Jillian Zeiger from the county to join me and help pull out some questions that we can answer in the next few minutes that we have. So Jillian?
Sure. Let me scroll up. So the first question is, thank you. How's this different from Make Room for Marin? So Make Room for Marin is it's one of our ADU initiatives. We have a new ADU website. It's actually adumarin.org, and accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, will be a part of our strategy for achieving our regional housing numbers. The next question, how does SB 9 and 10 affect the housing element? We are looking into this. Right now, the verbiage in SB 9 is quite vague. We're hoping that when it has some corrective language, we'll have a better understanding of how they affect the housing element, but assume that it will most likely create some more sites for us. Will Marin County consider rezoning subdividing West Marin? We are currently in our needs assessment process, and we're looking at possibilities for all sites in the county right now. We will have a time for the public to weigh in on where these sites will be in the county. Is it correct that the county only needs to plan and not build? Why is that so? So this is our chapter in the countywide plan. One of our goals of the plan is that developers come in and build. It's the job of the county and county planners to plan for it. So we hope plan and the builders will come. Let's see what else we have. Let me know if I'm missing any questions, John.
Yeah, there's some clarification of ADU. The website was shared,
okay.
And then we have a comment related to an SGV.
Okay, great. So in San Geronimo Valley, most of the opportunities would be ADUs. So those are accessory dwelling units, backyard cottages, also known as in-law units, on existing properties that have single family homes. This conversation would bring in every development topic that has been discussed in the past. So water, fish, habitat, parking, septic, etc. Is the intention to have this conversation in the context of the housing element? Yes, when we get into the sites conversation, and we're actually going to have breakout rooms tonight. If you have any solutions that relate to that, it'd be really helpful to hear before we get into our sites process. What happens if the county does not meet the RHNA goals? If the county doesn't meet the RHNA goals in terms of planning for housing numbers, there are quite a few consequences from the state. I can put them in the chat. Or one of my colleagues can put them in the chat. Okay, who should you contact if you want to explore doing ADUs? Is there help for homeowners to do this? Yes, we will put, I think adumarin.org was put in the chat. And if you live in unincorporated Marin County, you can email affordablehousing@marincounty.org. We'll put our contact information in the chat, but we have a lot of incentives for accessory dwelling units. Given the fact that RHNA doesn't require that all units be built, isn't it possible that the county could simply identify potential sites but never deliver or actually build affordable housing units on it? Is it true that Marin is challenging their RHNA numbers? If yes, why? Okay, so 2 questions. The county is identifying potential sites. We also have policies and programs, and some of those could actually incentivize development on those affordable housing sites. It's true that Marin is challenging RHNA numbers. There's a formal letter that I encourage you to read. We'll put information in the chat about that. Let's see. For successful affordable housing development, the county needs to allow developers to build 70+ units on site. The numbers don't work otherwise. Okay, I just want to add that we're having focus groups with nonprofit and for-profit developers to see if there's opportunities for building more or less than 70 units on a site. The Marin Water District is putting restrictions on building new units. How will this affect the house element plan? So we're aware of this, and we are consulting with the Marin Water District. We know that this is one of the larger issues. Okay, let's see. Is agricultural acreage considered available or underutilized for housing? If so, why is the county appealing the target? If not, why not if the rancher is willing to develop or sell for development? I can answer this question in the chat probably more thoroughly, but it depends on the zoning and the ownership. So if a rancher is willing to develop or sell for development, I think it could be a possibility. Like I said, we're just in the planning stage, and if you want to bring this up in the breakout rooms, that could be helpful. Looks like someone built an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, and wants to help renting it. So that's great. Follow-up question is, what is we meet the goal of planning, but there is no building implementation. So this is planning, and in terms of implementation, we have policies and programs that will help in terms of implementation and incentivize buildings, etc. Okay, if you build an ADU now, will it qualify for RHNA numbers for the next housing cycle? I believe if you build something before June 2022, it doesn't qualify for the next housing element cycle. Good, Veronica's nodding. Got that one right. Okay, so FYI, experience building a tiny accessory dwelling unit was a nightmare. Okay, I apologize for that. Actually love to hear about your experience so we can make it better in the future. What kind of financing assistance does the county have for affordable housing developers in terms of capital subsidy? There's a lot of different incentives we have for affordable housing. And if you want to direct message me or email affordablehousing@marincounty.org, happy to explain those. Okay, are there any incentives to individuals who would like to build an accessory dwelling unit? Yes, we do have quite a few incentives, including up to a $10,000 fee waiver for planning and building. So if you go to adumarin.org, there's more information there. Okay. Let's see. So Black people in Marin City have gone from more 90% after World War II due to restrictive zoning and denial of mortgage to 23% due to gentrification. Their children can't afford to live here. Why doesn't RHNA block SB 35, et cetera, from overriding community interest? Example, 825 Drake. Unfortunately, the RHNA can't block SB 35. However, I think this is something really great to bring up in your breakout room, because we can work together to try to find other solutions so that we can combat gentrification in Marin City. Okay, let's see. Good. Lily put the info about the board's RENA appeal. I encourage you to read that letter if you have questions about why that's being appealed. Okay. And I can't speak to the Measure A funds. So I think.
Yeah, Jillian, you did a fantastic job getting through those questions. We must have had 30 or 35 questions. So thank you for giving us such concise answers. And again, there have been links shared that take you to the website and some of the other county informational resources to give you a more in-depth answer to your question. So with that, let's close the Q&A on the housing element for now. And next, we are going to move into the discussion groups in breakout rooms. So through the magic of Zoom, you are all going to be randomly assigned to a breakout group. And each group has a facilitator and a note taker. They're following the same general guidelines, and the note takers are all using the same note-taking template. So each of the groups will have a similar format. There's a lot of opinions in the group, so please be respectful of each other. When you want to speak, just use the raise hand feature. Your facilitator can call on you. And we're asking that you stay focused on our housing element topic. So we want to start by hearing about your issues and concerns related to housing in unincorporated Marin County. And then we'll use the remaining time of the discussion to see what ideas you have, what solutions and strategies you have. There are a lot of, the facilitators are also experts, but they are going to be limited in the time that they have to take and answer questions, just so we can maximize discussion time in the group. At the end of the breakout groups, at the last minute or so, the facilitator is going to pull out some highlights and report back to the larger group. So we'll have about 8 to 10 minutes for that to happen. Just a reminder, we save everything in the chat. The notes from each room are a full record. They'll be part of the meeting summary. So if your comment isn't expressed verbally during the breakout room, it doesn't mean we missed it. It's just going to be part of the summary. So with that, you are going to be sent to your breakout rooms, and that will just take a moment. So we're not able to take questions. You can submit your question through the chat.
For the different languages.
Oh, yes. Anna, if you could make the, Myrna, if you could make the announcement for the Spanish-speaking folks for their breakout room to raise their hand. Okay, great. We have some hands going up for that. And yeah, let's just take a moment. This will help Anna, who is our Zoom producer, identify the participants who are seeking to be in the Spanish-speaking breakout group.
Si gustan participar en un grupo en español, por favor levanten la mano y así nos podemos poner en un grupo correcto.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have 4 hands, and you'll be working with Myrna Ortiz in your group. And then we'll see if we have any Vietnamese participants, or Vietnamese speaking participants who are seeking to participate. And if you could raise your hand. Okay, we'll just give that a moment. And so now you're being assigned to your breakout rooms. So please join your breakout room. And you'll have about 20 minutes. Okay, yes, they've gotten that final countdown message. Okay, everyone will be back in the main room in just a few seconds. A few of you have come back earlier. We also had some folks who joined us right at the end of the breakout group, so they've just been waiting for the group to resume. We appreciate everyone's patience. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your conversations in the breakout rooms. We had a lot of excellent participation. And so now we are just going to have some quick high-level summaries from each of the groups. And I'm going to call on the different facilitators in the order by their room number. And I'm going to ask you to give your highlights. And again, just a reminder, everything that was captured in the notes will be shared with the project team. It's also going to be part of the meeting summary, so you'll be able to see some of the details of the comments that were discussed in other groups. So let's go for our first group report, and just in a minute or less, we'll hear from Breakout Group 1, Jillian Zeiger. If you could give us a quick overview.
Okay. So in terms of issues and concerns, we had a lot of conversations about racial and income equity, how there are issues related to affordability. It's not sustainable for two-income family to own a house or buy a house in the county. There were a lot of issues and concerns around Marin City, that it's already congested, concerns around gentrification, environmental and infrastructure issues, strategies and solutions. So provide more ADU program incentives, in beefing up those incentives that we already have. Other strategies and solutions were tiny homes, more so that it would allow to build more ADUs. There was a suggestion to build more housing in the Lucas Valley area, and suggestions about rent to own options for policies and programs.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jillian. Let's hear from Breakout Group number 2, Lily Thomas.
Thank you. We had shared some of the concerns around ADU permitting. That was a difficult process, specifically around septic in West Marin. There was some concerns around the cost of renting and the fact that the amount of income that was needed to rent in this community, that it's really difficult for working families. And there was also some concerns around the appeals that have been proposed by by the Board of Supervisors as well as city councils, and just the way that starting the conversation thinking that they would be unable to meet those needs. There was some concerns around environmental justice, as well as and then some of the strategies and solutions that were explored included looking at ag land and some of the subsidies that are going there, kind of focusing on the original countywide plan that looked at density closer to 101, and really looking at having a place where we identified countywide where development should be. And there was some concerns around SB 35 and its impact, as well as exploring some opportunities with the new Senate Bill 9.
Okay, thank you, Lily. Let's hear from Breakout Group 3, Aileen Tanelian.
Thanks, Joan. In our group, one of the major themes that came out was that there needs to be a major cultural shift in Marin County in terms of the perception of affordable housing and who lives there. And with that, an educational campaign as well to educate the community about what affordable housing means and who actually lives there in terms of workers in the community and community members. Another thing that came out was discrimination for our communities of color to feel welcome in Marin, and culturally sensitive development was mentioned in Marin City specifically. Another thing is a lot of the red tape that's involved in affordable housing. A lot of folks, get through all the barriers to finally make it. And then there's something at the final stage that prohibits them from actually obtaining that unit. So that was something else that was mentioned. And then really, again, the need for political will to adopt policies that support affordable housing, and really setting that in a more actionable way rather than symbolic.
Okay, thank you, Aline. Let's go to breakout group number 4, Liz Darby.
Hi, thanks, Joan. So in our group, most of the conversation was around the fact that it's not just about building homes, it's the infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order for those homes to be built. So there were concerns that were raised about septic, environmental concerns, fire, water, and the capacity for the existing infrastructure to actually take on those additional housing projects. In addition to that, there was some concern about not being very specific about where the locations of the sites are in the unincorporated areas, because all areas in the unincorporated area are not created equal, and there's different land and there's different availability and opportunities for housing there. Some of the strategies that came up were home matching. There's a wonderful organization here in Marin County, I didn't know about it, who will actually match people to people who actually have homes, rooms in their homes. And this group actually identified working with seniors and low-income individuals, and pointed out, of course, the fact that there are many seniors who don't have pensions, and kind of have maybe even been living longer than they had originally planned, and are living on fixed incomes. And this is an opportunity, and we should create more opportunities like that. And finally, one of the people in the group talked about some really creative uses for housing. Are there opportunities to look at using mobile units, not necessarily cars, but other kinds of vehicles or other kind of transportations or tiny homes or things that are mobile as an opportunity for some solutions here at the county.
Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. Let's go to breakout group number 5, Scott Davidson. Okay.
Thanks, Joan. Sorry for the delay. We had a very robust conversation with a group that was very solution-oriented. So I am thrilled that Barbara took good notes, because there are a lot of very specific ideas that came out of the discussion. But there was, in terms of the housing question, there was a focus on a variety of fronts, including ownership, affordable ownership opportunities, addressing the needs of the very low more aggressively, and then other programs that might assist with some of the costs associated with ADUs and or home ownership, and programs that might provide some security and stability in housing, where if people run into challenges, they have support. And then there was a general discussion and support for anything we can do to eliminate discrimination and promote equity, both at the local and at the state level. So look beyond Marin County, and that's it.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And now we'll hear from breakout group number 6, Laura Stetson.
Thank you, Joan. I'm going to try to point to some new things that came out of group number 6. We had a great discussion. There was a planner from an incorporated community that indicated the county might want to revisit its policy about, let me try to get this right, that any proposal to create higher density housing in the county should actually be encouraged to annex to a city if that property is adjacent to a city boundary, essentially indicating that the cities are the ones that should have the higher density housing because they have the goods and services, but that maybe the county can take the responsibility to keep those in the county rather than encourage annexation to cities. There was a good discussion or a comment regarding certainly the need for larger housing and more affordable housing, so households are not overcrowded. That creates a number of conditions which were exacerbated during COVID, and allowed COVID to spread much more easily because people didn't have room to spread out and breathe and live because they were crammed into small housing that was all that they could afford. And then lastly, a comment that the right type of housing needs to be put in the right area. For example, senior housing needs to be near services and in flat areas that are walkable to meet the seniors' needs. So take into account the terrain, the services, the infrastructure, everything when we're looking at what kind of housing to put where, and really focus on how we can get the appropriate builders to build the right type of housing. So do things that really encourage folks, the development community, to build in a way and in areas that are suitable to various housing types.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. And then our last report out is from Breakout Group 7, and this is Myrna Ortiz will be reporting out.
Thank you, Joan. So in our group, participants shared that in Marin County, housing is too expensive, wages are too low, and participants have multiple jobs in order to maintain their housing. They are also living in shared housing, so there's up to 7 people per unit or multiple families living in one house or apartment. A lot of the apartments are not in good condition, and they would like to see opportunities of housing that is in better state. They're also wondering how the county is preparing to meet the needs of the Latino population that is growing in the county, and how they're connecting and communicating directly with this group. Some of the strategies recommended included an education or awareness campaign so that more people understand why we need to build housing in the county. There's always a lot of pushback when there's new affordable housing developments or projects or programs like Home Key. We need to build housing that gives priority to essential workers. And there was a recommendation for the county, again, to work more closely with BIPOC or Latino communities and BIPOC developers so that they feel encouraged to build in Marin County, and that there should be benefits to really get those numbers of units built, not just planned for.
Okay, thank you, Myrna. I want to thank all our facilitators and note takers and all of you for your participation. We've gotten some excellent understanding of your issues and concerns, and we also appreciate all of the strategies that have been suggested. So with that, we're going to bring the housing element part of the meeting to a close. And remember, there's other opportunities, but that's it for this evening. So next, we are going to be moving on to the safety element update. And you'll be hearing from Barbara Beard. She is a senior environmental planner with MIG. She'll be making the presentation. That'll be followed by a short question answer period. And then we're going to have a large group discussion using the chat and a digital whiteboard. Barbara?
Thank you, Joan, for that introduction. If we could go to the first slide there, thank you very much. To start off with, I'd like to just give a very brief description of what a safety element is so that we all have the same basic understanding. A safety element is a required component of a general plan, and it contains the goals and policies to prepare for and protect the public from the harmful impacts of environmental hazards, such as wildfire, flooding, landslides, sea level rise, drought, and extreme heat. The safety element addresses environmental hazards. It does not deal with public safety or policing issues. So we're just talking about environmental hazards when we're talking about the safety element. Next slide, please. In Marin County, the general plan is called the countywide plan, and it contains 3 main elements. The countywide plan does not contain a traditional safety element per se, but rather distributes the safety element required policies in the 3 different elements. But for ease of discussion and reference, we will be talking about the safety element as required by state law under the general plan requirements. But we would just know that the policies that are safety element oriented are distributed between those 3 elements. Next slide, please. So why is the safety element being updated? Marin is initiating the safety element update to address climate change resiliency in response to current state law. SB 379 requires safety elements to contain climate change adaptation measures covering the things we just mentioned, the sea level rise, wildfire hazard, extreme weather events, and a few other items. In addition, other state law requires the safety elements to cover fire risk in much more detail and address certain kinds of flooding issues that haven't been typically required in the safety element. So those issues will be brought into the safety element update process at this time. The update will occur simultaneously and in conjunction with the housing element, and will also occur in coordination with the update of the Marin County multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plan. All three elements cover safety and environmental hazards, and the county's intent is to coordinate all of the documentation that's occurring right now. Next slide, please. The process for updating the safety element starts with a review of the existing documents that the county has already prepared. And they've done a number of documents related to environmental hazards that will be a great building block for the safety element update. We will review that existing work and summarize it, and it will be the basis for us preparing a vulnerability assessment, which is a required document to support the safety element. And the vulnerability assessment looks at and summarizes the environmental hazards. It presents a discussion of vulnerable populations within the county, and it also presents key infrastructure that could be at risk. And the findings of the vulnerability assessment then feed into the development of the safety element and its implementation programs. Next slide, please. The vulnerability assessment is a very important step in developing a solid safety element and making sure that the safety element includes all of the relevant policies and implementation programs that the county would want it to include. The content of the vulnerability assessment is directed in part by the state, which gives guidance to jurisdictions on how to prepare a vulnerability assessment. And it discusses the hazards that are primarily focused on climate change. And those are identified briefly as, being inland flooding and sea level rise, wildfire hazard, severe weather events, including extreme heat events, drought, and landslide and subsistence issues that are triggered by climate change weather patterns. Next slide, please. And that is a very short introduction to the safety element.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Yes, so I'll turn it back to you, Joan.
Okay, so similar to as we did for the housing element, we want to take your questions. Again, we're just getting started on the safety element. Barbara's given you a quick overview. We're also going to be assisted by Leslie Lako from Marin County to help answer some of the questions that come in. So let's see. We have some comments in the chat, and I'm just looking for some questions related to the safety element. There were a few that were answered while Barbara was speaking, but please let us know if you have any initial questions regarding the safety element. Okay, let's see. We have a question. I was a member of Sausalito's landslide task force after our February 13th, 2019 landslide. We found we have terribly outdated mapping. How is the county helping to update them?
Right, and I might ask Leslie to jump in and assist with this answer, but there is a robust mapping component to the vulnerability assessment and the safety element, trying to rely on the most current maps and data available. Leslie, do you know if the county is updating the landslide maps in any way?
Not since 2018. So the most updated maps we have were 2018. And so we don't have updated maps from since then. So actually, that looks like something that, since that was in 2019, I might want to look at that. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Thank you very much.
Okay, so, and that is something, that information can be added to the website as well. Oh, and the person who asked that question amended their comment to say at the time they were working with 50-year-old topo maps. Okay, so here's a question. We might need someone from the housing element team to join in as well. How specifically does the housing element integrate the vulnerability assessment and safety element?
I might take a stab from the vulnerability assessment standpoint, and then the housing element experts could jump in.
Sure.
The vulnerability assessment is gathering information on all the environmental hazards within the county and presenting as detailed maps and as current maps as are available to date. And that information is actually going to be available to the housing team as they do a site selection process. And those hazards would be considered as sites are under discussion for the housing element process.
Okay, and Jillian, would you like to add anything?
No, that was a great answer. I just want to say that, you know, county staff are working together at every step in the process, and we're meeting internally to make sure that all the goals align for housing and safety element.
Okay, great. Will you be studying the adequacy of evacuation routes for wildfire? I think often of the Paradise Fire.
That is a required component of the safety element, is to present and address evacuation routes and the adequacy of them.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Let's see, I am looking for a few more questions. There's some comments in the chat. Let's see, any other comments or questions on the safety element? Yes, would drought be part of this? There are ways to amend the water provision and radically make easier reuse and recycled water.
Drought is considered a climate action, you know, consequence, the word I was looking for, and it will be part of the vulnerability assessment and the safety element update. Again, the policies would be general plan, very high level kinds of policies, but there are going to be an implementation program that goes along with that, which would focus in and present solutions and actions that the county could follow up on. So there'll be opportunity for the county to actually put forward ideas that they can follow up on in the future.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. We have a comment. My parents lost their home in the Tubbs fire and they evacuated only because neighbors helped neighbors. The alert system was non-existent. What will Marin County do to ensure that residents are updated in real time when disaster strikes?
Leslie, would you like to talk about where the county is with that program?
With Stonehaven, is that?
That's what I was thinking of, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so Marin County residents, I'm sorry for the background noise, busy household. Marin County residents voted to fund the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority last year, and one of the first projects that authority took on was to identify evacuation routes and put together a system called Zone Haven to help people evacuate during emergencies. And that system has just come online and they have just started their public outreach. So you should be hearing about where to tune in and how to get information in case of an emergency within the next month. So they have a very robust public outreach program as part of that project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. Our next question is BCDC working with the county on sea level rise issues for coastal residents?
Yeah, the county works very closely with BCDC. BCDC is in the middle of their Bay Adapt program, which is a region-wide program to look at the types of changes that need to be made policy-wise to allow local governments to adapt more effectively to sea level rise. They have a report that's out now, and we have been involved in that process and are providing comments on the report now.
Okay, let's see, there's a comment that BCDC just covers San Francisco Bay, not the ocean. California Coastal Commission handles Pacific Coast. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and what does BCDC stand for?
The San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission.
Okay.
So they are a state agency with regional jurisdiction. I happened to work for them for 10 years before coming to the county.
Okay. Next question, and we might need some county support on this one. What plans are in place to reach the unhoused during a disaster? And I'll see if there's someone on the county team who, or Leslie, if you're able to answer that.
My answer is, I don't know. We have an emergency response plan that's operated through the sheriff's office and someone from the sheriff's office on our interdepartmental working group. And so I can consult with them, and that would be an answer that we would provide as follow-up.
Okay, and that can be added to the website, to the FAQs as a follow-up to this meeting. Okay, are there any other questions related to the safety element at this time? Okay, and I just want to keep us on track so that we finish at 8 o'clock. So now we want to move to our chat discussion with you, and we're going to be using a digital whiteboard. And just for the next 10 minutes, we're going to be asking you, in the context of the issues that the safety element covers, as you know, the county's response related to extreme weather and natural disasters. Again, first we want to receive some of your issues and concerns in the chat, and then your ideas for solutions and strategies. And with that, we're now going to switch, and I'm going to pull up a digital whiteboard so you can see how we're capturing these comments. I have my MIG colleagues behind the scenes who are helping to populate this with the comments that have come in. So, so far through the chat, we had an issue and concern about, let's see, we had about earthquakes being included in the safety element, which is correct. We shared some updated materials and resources related to mapping. There were some issues and concerns about evacuation route considerations and vulnerability, considerations related to drought, comments related to the alert systems and the tub fires. What other issues and concerns do you have? And we'll just give you a moment to give us your ideas in the chat. And again, thinking in the context of natural disasters, as we're preparing the safety element, what are some of the topics we want to be, okay, so we have a, let's see, a comment about if the county is determined to still put a 20-unit short and long-term resident hotel at 150 Shoreline, Manzanita, on a platform that raises the building 3 feet above the FEMA's flood zone, it makes no sense to raise the building if residents' cars and other buildings are flooded in high rain events. Okay, so a concern about a development proposal, its location, and in the context of it being located in a flood zone. Then we have concerns about building on shorelines, sea level rise, that we have lead coordinating with county efforts. Another comment about the power needed during PG&E outages, How about neighborhood solar installations where a sunny home could provide solar generated? Okay, we have an issue. We've also had a solution suggested there. Issues, concerns about countywide efforts. These events are restricted by jurisdictional lines. A concern about, please include the impacts of disasters on the unhoused community. Then a concern about maintenance of the statewide emergency response system, including county and municipal response. A concern, when will we face that we may have to retreat from WI and shorelines? Okay, a comment, everyone ought to have grab and go bags ready for evacuation. Pre-planning is so important to not have regrets, lost documents and photos. So more reminders to the public about being ready to go. Okay, other issues and concerns related to the safety element, things you want to make sure that we are considering and addressing. Comments about cell phone service. It's still completely non-existent in large parts of the unincorporated county. My home in Tam Valley has never had reception on any carrier. What can the county do to proactively enable cell phone service by working with at least one phone carrier so that we are not completely cut off in an emergency? Another comment, fire prevention starts with building upgrades, fire resistant materials, gutter guards, etc. But there's no funding to assist homeowners. Instead, all the money seems to be going to tearing out trees and vegetation without regard to wildlife. Just a comment about the unhoused numbers being too low. Not all are in Novato, San Rafael. And then there's a reference to the Bay model in Sausalito. Then there's a question, is there a safe number of people for an area in terms of evacuations and water? Can we keep growing in general due to various safety factors? And we have a comment about low-income residents have a harder time replacing lost food during a disaster. Can we include an acknowledgement that they should receive the resources needed to replace lost food? Okay, great, thank you. We appreciate these ideas and concerns being identified here. So we can also start thinking about, and just to give you all just a little, here's our note taking. And again, we also download directly from the chat. Let's see, the county should have a well-publicized directory of emergency shelters when disaster strikes. Will specific emergency shelters be included in the safety element? Okay, so a comment about making sure that they're covered and included. Okay, other issues or concerns. Okay, we have a comment in the chat, and Myrna, I'm going to ask you if you can translate that for the larger group.
Yes. So one concern is that the Latino community doesn't have the information necessary in case of a disaster, and they don't have the resources either.
Okay, thank you. And there's a comment following that in Spanish, if you could translate that as well.
In the canal area, there aren't any first responding like bags or bags to help people in case of emergencies, and people are not ready in case there's a natural disaster.
Okay, so identifying specific resources that aren't available during an emergency. Thank you, Myrna. Then we have a comment about contamination of our dwindling reservoir water supply if there's a fire. Okay. So we can continue to take issues and concerns. I just want to be mindful of the time as well. Let's hear if people have ideas and solutions. So we've had a few suggested already. about installing solar power, density, suggestions regarding building updates and efficiencies. We have a question about what happens to renters when their units are damaged. So making sure the various elements respond to that question. Other ideas and solutions related to the safety element. Okay, there needs to be a plan in place for the sick and the shut-in when disaster hits. So making sure we're taking care of our most vulnerable residents. Okay, other issues and concerns, or some ideas and solutions. Okay, we'll see if there's, let's see. Okay, so we have a suggested solution. Whoops. Okay, and just let me, that has, so the person is suggesting have the county figure out which parts of the unincorporated county have no cell service whatsoever. They give the example of Tam Valley and Highway 1 shoreline. Can we map the dead areas along with the topography? So there's a potential information need. And then a question, what can the county do in terms of if water levels affect us in the canal area? So making sure that the plan has considered that question. Okay, and let's just take a few more minutes here. So again, your issues and concerns. Okay, we have a concern. I'm concerned about the high-tech solutions provided that exclude low-tech elders. So for example, alerts on cell phones, and they give an example that in Hawaii, they use sirens. We have a suggestion to explore planning for more distributive energy sites. So when PG&E goes down, it is less disruptive.
We have one in Spanish. The suggestion is to create a community trust that protects people's belongings that they might lose during a disaster if they are low income.
Okay, thank you, Myrna. We have identify alternate evacuation routes when main corridors are blocked or underwater. And then we have a suggestion of tiny homes could be put on floats to become future floating homes, like the floating homes community on Gate 5 and 6 Road in Commodore. They could attach to shorelines later. And then also a concern about flooding of utilities on low-lying roads and US 101. Okay, other comments? See, okay, we have another one that has come in. Another solution, to use the new maps of no cell service to figure out if the county owns any nearby parcels of land. They don't have to be very large at all. And then have them work with a carrier to install a new cell tower. They don't have to be very large. 5G can be installed on existing power lines, but the county needs to reach out to the carriers to make that happen. We have a concern about restoring our marshes. And then just a question about BCDC. Did they say that no more marinas could go into Richardson Bay? And if that can be answered through the chat, that could be helpful. Could hotels in safe areas be used as shelters in a disaster funded by special funds? See, then we have a suggestion to increase the use of small form EV vehicles to reduce pollution and traffic, electric bikes and very small autos, providing a lane for these vehicles on roads. Okay. Let's see, other comments coming in. Okay, I have another one that has just come in. Okay, some issues related to large systems. utility systems versus individual needs. Work with existing organizations on the ground who are connected to communities to ensure personal needs are met. The Marin County Cooperation Teams is provided as an example. We have a concern about the low-income people. They're always affected in disasters. Okay, we got a reply from the county about the comment related to the marinas. It's very difficult to get permits, but she's not aware of any outright ban. We have a suggestion about using Comcast wire-based network to broadcast alerts. Okay, and just maybe another 2 minutes or so. And again, I can zoom in a little on the board so that you can see that we have just a lot of, a wide variety of ideas here. And again, let's see. Myrna, there's a comment that just came in Spanish, if you can help me with that.
Finding ways to store food and medicines or perishables.
Okay. Then we have a suggestion to map non-road evacuation routes. This would be fire roads and trails. Okay, and then we have a suggestion that if and when you make a list of shelters for future disasters, make sure to clearly include at each location whether or not pets can be included. One of the main reasons people don't evacuate is that they don't know where to go with their pets. Even hotels will often not allow them. We have a suggestion of providing a second exit for Marin City. As idea for helping low-income folks to acquire go bags. Then there's a question about, is the Marin Community Foundation involved in helping the county to get on those issues with grants? A suggestion and a note here that the Marin Bike Coalition has that map of trails with the evacuation routes that was referenced. So we have an existing resource there to share. Okay, and let's just take another minute here. And so, you know, just to review, we have a great list of ideas and solutions. And then over here, we have a very broad and detailed list of different issues and concerns that you hope the plan will address. And all of this information will be going to our team. So with that, we're going to close this part of the discussion. And we really appreciate everyone participating the way that they have. So we just have a few more slides to review the next steps. So there's some upcoming opportunities for input. So there's going to be a survey coming out. It's going to be online and in print. It will also be available in Spanish. Then we have an online discussion tool. Consider it, that will allow us to put out a statement and get community input on how people feel about it. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? And please tell us why. And then there will be more community workshops coming up. In terms, just a little bit idea on the general calendar, the survey will be coming out in early October. This Consider It discussion tool will be launched and ready in mid-October. We're looking at dates for a community workshop that will be held in early November. And staff and the consultant team are preparing for a joint planning commission and board of supervisors meeting. That's scheduled for December 7th, and that's a public meeting that everyone is welcome to attend. We want to refer you to the website. Here's this web address. The link has been put in the chat at least once or twice during this meeting. That will be a go-to resource for additional information about the preparation of the housing and safety elements, future outreach activities, and also answers to the questions that have been discussed tonight. In terms of our timeline, here we are in the fall where we are getting input. So we have a variety of activities that I just reviewed with you. During the winter, we start getting more specific, and we'll be talking about potential housing sites and the land use changes needed. On the safety front, we'll be looking at the hazard risk areas and solutions. Then also the environmental analysis starts from winter through the spring, and the analysis will cover both elements. In the spring and summer of 22, you'll start to see draft elements, both the housing and safety elements and the related zoning amendments. Then we have the review process, which starts in the summer of 2022. There'll be public review, and then we also have review by CAL FIRE and the state HCD agency, which approves the elements. They do an initial review, and then it'll go to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors for their consideration, with the intent of achieving a January 2023 adoption deadline so that we meet the state requirements. So that's our general timeline. There'll be more specific dates on the website. And now I would like to turn it back to Lily Thomas from the county for some closing comments.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you to everyone for your participation. We appreciate your commitment to being involved in your community. And I hope that the workshop was useful and provided you a good overview of the housing and safety element updates. Your input is valued and important, and this is just the beginning of the process. There will be many more opportunities for you to be involved, and we look forward to hearing from each of you in the future. And thank you for being here, and good night.
Okay, thank you, Lily. I want to thank our facilitators and note takers, our presenters and question answerers. We appreciate all of your contributions to this meeting. And most importantly, we appreciate all the ideas and feedback that you have shared with us tonight. So with that, our meeting comes to a close and we are officially adjourned. Thank you for your time this evening. Good night.